You know what's funny? Most people think being rich means driving a Lamborghini and wearing designer clothes everywhere you go. But what if I told you that the guy who literally wrote the book on getting rich drives a Honda Civic and shops at Costco? That's Ramit Sethi, and his approach to wealth is going to completely flip everything you think you know about money on its head. See, Ramit discovered something that most financial gurus won't tell you, that building wealth isn't about cutting out your daily latte or living like a monk. It's about creating a system that lets you spend lavishly on the things you love while automatically handling everything else. And here's the crazy part. He's helped millions of people do exactly that using what he calls his 6-week program. But before we dive into how this all works, let me ask you something. When was the last time you checked your bank account without that little knot forming in your stomach? When was the last time you bought something you really wanted without immediately feeling guilty about it? If you're like most people, those moments are pretty rare. That's because we've been taught this weird relationship with money, where we're either completely ignoring it or obsessing over every penny. Ramit calls this the all-or-nothing trap, and it's keeping millions of Americans broke. So here's what happened. Back in college, Ramit was just like everyone else, broke, stressed about money, and getting terrible advice from well-meaning people who told him to clip coupons and track every expense. But Ramit was studying psychology at Stanford, and he started noticing something interesting. All the traditional money advice was focused on restriction and punishment. Cut this out, don't buy that, feel bad about spending anything. It was like financial dieting, and we all know how well diets work long-term, right? So Ramit started experimenting with a different approach. Instead of focusing on what he couldn't spend, he started focusing on what he could spend. Instead of trying to micromanage every dollar, he created systems that would handle his money automatically. And instead of feeling guilty about his purchases, he gave himself permission to spend on things that truly mattered to him. The results were incredible. Not only did he start building wealth, but he actually enjoyed the process. He wasn't stressed about money anymore. He wasn't checking his account balance obsessively, and he was spending more on the things he loved than he ever had before. But here's the key. He was also saving and investing more than he ever had before, too. Now, when Ramit started sharing this approach with his friends, they thought he was crazy. How could you possibly save more money by giving yourself permission to spend more? But the results spoke for themselves. His friends started following his system, and within months, they were seeing the same results. They were building emergency funds, paying off debt, and investing for retirement, all while spending more on the things they actually cared about. This is when Ramit realized he had stumbled onto something powerful. Traditional financial advice was treating the symptoms, not the disease. The real problem wasn't that people were spending too much money. It was that they had no system for managing their money, no clarity about what they actually wanted, and no way to automate the boring stuff so they could focus on living their lives. Think about it this way. If you're constantly worried about money, constantly making financial decisions, constantly feeling guilty about your purchases, how much mental energy does that consume? How much stress does that create? And what if all of that worry and stress was actually making you worse with money, not better?
He understood that money isn't really about money. It's about psychology. It's about our beliefs, our emotions, our habits, and our identity. Most people fail with money not because they don't know what to do, but because they're fighting against their own psychology. They're trying to use willpower to overcome systems problems. They're trying to think their way out of emotional patterns. They're trying to make hundreds of tiny decisions instead of making a few big decisions once. So Ramit designed his entire system around human psychology. Instead of requiring constant willpower and decision-making, his system removes decisions. Instead of making you feel guilty about spending, it gives you permission to spend guilt-free. Instead of micromanaging every transaction, it focuses on the big picture. And instead of treating money like this serious, scary thing, it makes managing money almost boring, which is exactly what you want. Let me tell you about Sarah, one of Ramit's students. Sarah was a marketing manager in Chicago, making about $60,000 a year. She was drowning in credit card debt, had no savings, and was constantly stressed about money. Every month, she'd promise herself she'd get her finances together, and every month, she'd end up in the same place. She tried budgeting apps, she tried the envelope method, she even tried putting her credit cards in the freezer. Nothing worked. Then, Sarah discovered Ramit's approach, and everything changed. But here's what's interesting. Ramit didn't tell Sarah to cut her spending. He didn't tell her to stop buying coffee or cancel her gym membership. Instead, he helped her set up a system that would automatically handle her money, and then he gave her permission to spend guilt-free on the things that truly matter to her. Within 6 months, Sarah had paid off her credit card debt, built a 4-month emergency fund, and was investing 15% of her income for retirement. But here's the crazy part. She was also spending more on the things she loved than she ever had before. She was taking cooking classes, she'd upgraded her apartment, and she was planning a trip to Europe. How is this possible? The answer lies in what Ramit calls conscious spending. Most people think there are 2 types of spenders: the responsible ones who save money and the irresponsible ones who spend it. But Ramit discovered there's actually a 3rd type, the conscious spender. Conscious spenders understand that money is a tool, not a goal. They know that the purpose of money isn't to accumulate it, but to use it to build the life they want. They're not cheap and they're not wasteful. They spend aggressively on the things they love, and they cut costs mercilessly on the things they don't. Think about it this way. Let's say you love traveling, but you couldn't care less about having the latest iPhone. A conscious spender would buy a phone that's 2 years old and use the savings to fund amazing trips. They wouldn't feel guilty about spending $3,000 on a vacation because they know they've saved that money by not caring about having the newest gadgets. But here's what most people do instead. They feel guilty about everything. They feel guilty about the vacation, and they feel guilty about the phone. Or they spend money on both without thinking about it, and then they feel guilty about their entire financial situation. Conscious spending eliminates this guilt by creating a clear framework for what you should spend money on and what you shouldn't. Now, you might be wondering how exactly this works in practice. How do you become a conscious spender? How do you set up these systems that Ramit talks about? Well, it all starts with what he calls the money dials concept. Imagine your financial life has 10 different dials: travel, food, health, entertainment, education, family, convenience, social status, freedom, and security. Most people try to turn all the dials up to maximum, which is impossible, or they try to turn them all down to minimum, which is miserable. But conscious spenders understand that you can only turn a few dials up to maximum, so you need to choose which ones matter most to you. For some people, the travel dial is cranked all the way up. They'll spend $20,000 a year on amazing trips, but they'll live in a tiny apartment and drive an old car. For others, the convenience dial is maxed out. They'll pay for grocery delivery, house cleaning, and premium services, but they'll never eat at expensive restaurants. The key is being intentional about which dials you're turning up and which ones you're turning down.
This is where most financial advice gets it completely wrong. Traditional advice tells everyone to turn down the same dials. Don't eat out. Don't buy coffee. Don't spend money on entertainment. But what if eating out is one of your top values? What if coffee shops are where you do your best work? What if entertainment is how you connect with friends and family? When you cut spending on things that truly matter to you, you're not just saving money, you're making yourself miserable. And miserable people don't stick to financial plans. They rebel against them. They binge spend. They give up entirely. But when you give yourself permission to spend on what you love, something magical happens. You become more motivated to cut spending on things that don't matter to you. You become more creative about finding ways to save money. You become more committed to your financial goals because you can see how they're helping you build the life you want. Let me share another story that really illustrates this point. Ramit once worked with a couple named Mike and Jennifer. Mike was obsessed with getting the best deals on everything. He'd spend hours researching purchases, comparing prices, and looking for coupons. Jennifer thought this was a complete waste of time and energy. They were constantly fighting about money. Mike thought Jennifer was irresponsible, and Jennifer thought Mike was cheap. Sound familiar? When they started working with Ramit, he helped them identify their money dials. Mike's security dial was cranked all the way up. He needed to feel like he was being smart with money and getting good deals. Jennifer's convenience dial was maxed out. She valued her time more than saving a few dollars. Once they understood this, they were able to create a system that worked for both of them. They gave Mike a deals budget, a certain amount of money each month that he could spend on finding bargains and optimizing purchases. And they gave Jennifer a convenience budget, money she could spend on services and premium options that saved her time. The result? They both got what they wanted, they stopped fighting about money, and they actually started saving more because they had a clear system for managing their different priorities. But here's what really makes Ramit's approach different from everything else out there. Most financial advice focuses on the technical stuff, interest rates, investment strategies, tax optimization, and while those things matter, they're not what's keeping most people broke. What's keeping most people broke is that they don't have systems. They're making dozens of financial decisions every single day, and they're making most of them poorly because they're tired, stressed, or distracted. Think about your typical day. You wake up and decide whether to make coffee at home or buy it on the way to work. You decide what to eat for lunch. You decide whether to take an Uber or public transportation. You decide whether to go out with friends or stay home. You decide whether to buy something you see online or wait until later. By the end of the day, you've made hundreds of small financial decisions, and each one has chipped away at your mental energy and your bank account. But what if you could eliminate most of these decisions? What if you could set up systems that handled the boring stuff automatically, so you could focus your energy on the things that actually matter? This is the heart of Ramit's system: automation. Not just automatic bill pay, but automatic everything. Automatic savings, automatic investments, automatic debt payments, automatic transfers. The goal is to set up your financial life so that good things happen without you having to think about them. Let me walk you through how this works. First, you set up what Ramit calls your money flow. This is a system where your paycheck gets automatically divided into different buckets the moment it hits your account. A certain percentage goes to fixed expenses like rent and utilities. Another percentage goes to savings. Another percentage goes to investments. Another percentage goes to debt payments if you have them. And the rest goes to your conscious spending account, money you can spend on whatever you want without guilt. The beauty of this system is that you never have to wonder whether you can afford something. If the money's in your conscious spending account, you can spend it. If it's not, you can't. No guilt, no stress, no complicated calculations, just clear, simple rules that remove the emotional drama from money decisions.
Now, let me tell you about the time Ramit challenged one of his students to a spending contest. This student, let's call him David, was obsessed with frugality. He tracked every penny, clipped coupons, and bragged about spending less than $20 a week on groceries. Ramit bet David that he could spend more money than David and still end up with more wealth at the end of the year. David thought this was impossible, but he agreed to the challenge. Here's what happened. David continued his extreme frugality, saving every penny he could. But because he was so focused on cutting costs, he never invested in himself. He didn't take courses to improve his skills, he didn't invest in networking opportunities, and he didn't even invest his savings because he was afraid of losing money. Meanwhile, Ramit spent thousands of dollars on things that mattered to him: high-quality food, travel, education, and experiences. But he also invested aggressively in index funds and focused on increasing his income through side projects and skill development. At the end of the year, David had saved about $3,000. Ramit had spent $15,000 more than David, but he had also increased his income by $25,000 and built an investment portfolio worth $40,000. The lesson? Extreme frugality isn't just miserable, it's actually a poor financial strategy. When you're so focused on cutting costs that you can't invest in yourself or your future, you're optimizing for the wrong thing. This brings us to one of the most controversial parts of Ramit's philosophy, his stance on budgeting. Most financial experts will tell you that budgeting is essential, that you need to track every expense and categorize every purchase. But Ramit thinks budgeting is not only unnecessary for most people, it's actually counterproductive. Here's why. Budgeting is based on the assumption that you need to micromanage your money to be successful with it. But think about other areas of your life. Do you micromanage your breathing? Do Do you consciously control your heartbeat? Of course not. These systems run automatically, and that's what makes them reliable. The same principle applies to money. When you have good systems in place, you don't need to micromanage every transaction. The system takes care of the important stuff automatically, and you can focus on living your life. But there's another problem with budgeting. It focuses on restriction instead of abundance. When you're constantly thinking about what you can't spend, you're reinforcing a scarcity mindset. You're training yourself to see money as something to be hoarded instead of something to be used wisely. This creates a psychological tension that most people can't maintain long-term. They either become obsessed with money, checking their accounts constantly and feeling guilty about every purchase, or they rebel against the restrictions and go on spending sprees that destroy their financial progress. Instead of budgeting, Ramit advocates for what he calls conscious spending plans. The difference is subtle but important. A budget tells you what you can't spend. A conscious spending plan tells you what you can spend. It's the difference between restriction and permission, between scarcity and abundance. Here's how it works. You start by calculating your fixed expenses: rent, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments. These are non-negotiable, so you automate them completely. Then you decide how much you want to save and invest each month. This becomes another non-negotiable that gets automated. What's left over is your conscious spending money. Money you can spend on whatever you want without tracking, without guilt, without justification. The beauty of this system is that it puts the psychology on your side instead of against you. Instead of feeling restricted, you feel empowered. Instead of feeling guilty about spending, you feel confident that you're handling your money responsibly. And instead of making dozens of financial decisions every day, you make a few big decisions once and let the system handle the rest. But what about emergencies? What about unexpected expenses? This is where most people get tripped up. They create a perfect financial plan and then life happens. The car breaks down, the dog gets sick, the roof starts leaking. Suddenly they're back to using credit cards and feeling like they've failed. Ramit's system handles this too. He recommends building what he calls a guilt-free emergency fund. Not just money for true emergencies, but money for all the unexpected stuff that happens in life. Car repairs, medical bills, wedding gifts, holiday spending. All of this gets factored into your system from the beginning. You're not just planning for perfect months, you're planning for real life. And here's the thing about emergencies. Most of them aren't really emergencies. They're just expenses that we didn't plan for. When you have systems in place that account for the unexpected, what used to be financial crises become minor inconveniences. Your car breaks down? No problem. You've got money set aside for car repairs. Your friend gets engaged? Great. You've got money set aside for wedding gifts. This isn't just about having money available. It's about having the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're prepared for whatever life throws at you.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room: debt. If you're carrying credit card debt, student loans, or other high-interest debt, you might be thinking that conscious spending sounds nice, but you need to focus on paying off your debt first. And you're partially right. Debt, especially high-interest debt, is a financial emergency that needs to be addressed. But here's where Ramit's approach is different from most debt advice. Most experts will tell you to cut your spending to the bone, live like a monk, and throw every extra penny at your debt. This is the debt diet approach. And like most diets, it doesn't work long-term. Why? Because it's based on deprivation and willpower, and both of those have expiration dates. Instead, Ramit advocates for what he calls strategic debt elimination. You still prioritize paying off high-interest debt, but you do it in a way that's sustainable and doesn't make you miserable. You automate your debt payments so you don't have to think about them every month. You still give yourself permission to spend on the things that matter most to you, just at a reduced level. And you focus on increasing your income instead of just cutting expenses. This last point is huge, and it's something that most financial advice completely ignores. There's a limit to how much you can cut your expenses, but there's no limit to how much you can increase your income. Yet most people spend all their time trying to save $50 a month on groceries instead of figuring out how to earn an extra $500 a month. Ramit calls this optimization versus growth, and understanding the difference can transform your financial life. Optimization is about doing the same thing more efficiently. It's about finding cheaper car insurance, cutting a cable bill, or using coupons at the grocery store. These things have value, but they're limited. You can only optimize so much before you hit diminishing returns. Growth is about doing different things or doing things differently. It's about increasing your skills, starting a side business, or negotiating a raise. Growth has no upper limit, and that's where the real money is. Think about it this way. Let's say you spend 2 hours a month trying to save $50 on various expenses. That's a return of $25 per hour, which isn't bad. But what if you spent those same 2 hours learning a new skill that could increase your income by $500 a month? That's a return of $250 per hour. Even if it takes you a year to see results, you're still way ahead. This is why Ramit spends so much time talking about career advancement and side businesses. He understands that for most people, the path to wealth isn't through extreme frugality, it's through increasing their income. And the best part is, the income increases compound over time. If you get a $5,000 raise this year, that's not just $5,000, it's $5,000 every year for the rest of your career, plus all the future raises that will be calculated based on your higher salary. But here's what's interesting. Most people are terrible at negotiating their salary, asking for raises, or positioning themselves for promotions. They're so focused on cutting expenses that they completely neglect the income side of the equation. Ramit has helped thousands of people increase their income, and he's identified some common patterns among the people who are most successful at doing it. First, they think of their career as a business. They invest in themselves, they build relationships, and they're always looking for ways to add more value. Second, they're strategic about their moves. They don't just work harder, they work smarter. They position themselves for high-visibility projects, they build skills that are in demand, and they're not afraid to change jobs when it makes sense. Third, they're comfortable with negotiation. They understand that salary negotiation isn't about being aggressive or demanding, it's about demonstrating value and finding win-win solutions. Let me tell you about Maria, another one of Ramit's students. Maria was a graphic designer making $45,000 a year. She was good at her job, but she was terrible at promoting herself. She'd been at the same company for 3 years without a significant raise, and she was starting to feel stuck. When she started working with Ramit, he didn't tell her to cut a spending or start a strict budget. Instead, he helped her develop a strategy for increasing her income. First, they identified the skills that were most valuable in her industry. Then they created a plan for her to develop those skills and document her results. Next, they worked on her negotiation skills and helped her build a case for a raise. The result? Within 6 months, Maria had negotiated a $15,000 raise. But it didn't stop there. The confidence she gained from that success led her to start freelancing on the side, which brought in another $10,000 a year. 2 years later, she left her job to start her own design agency, and she's now making more than she ever thought possible. The key wasn't cutting expenses or budgeting more carefully. It was focusing on the income side of the equation and being strategic about her career development.
But what about investing? This is where a lot of people get overwhelmed. They think they need to become experts in the stock market, research individual companies, and constantly monitor their portfolios. But Ramit's approach to investing is refreshingly simple. He advocates for what he calls lazy investing, a strategy that requires minimal time and effort but delivers solid long-term results. The core of lazy investing is index funds. Instead of trying to pick individual stocks or time the market, you invest in low-cost index funds that track the overall market. This gives you instant diversification, professional management, and historically solid returns. But here's the best part. You don't need to know anything about investing to be successful with this approach. You don't need to read financial statements, analyze market trends, or make complex decisions. You just need to set up automatic investments and let compound interest do the work. Ramit often tells the story of 2 investors. Let's call them Active Andy and Lazy Lisa. Andy spends hours every week researching stocks, reading financial news, and adjusting his portfolio. He's convinced that his expertise gives him an edge over the market. Lisa, on the other hand, invests in a simple 3-fund portfolio of index funds and doesn't think about it again. She checks her account maybe once a year, and that's it. After 10 years, who do you think has more money? In most cases, it's Lisa. Despite spending a fraction of the time and effort, her simple approach outperforms Andy's complex strategy. Why? Because Andy's constant trading generates fees and taxes. His emotions lead him to buy high and sell low, and his attempts to time the market usually backfire. This brings us to one of the most important psychological aspects of building wealth: the power of automation and time. Most people think that building wealth requires constant attention and sophisticated strategies. But the truth is that time and consistency are much more powerful than intelligence or complexity. When you automate your investments, you remove emotion from the equation. You're not tempted to sell when the market is down or buy when it's up. You're not constantly second-guessing your decisions or trying to optimize your strategy. You just invest consistently, regardless of what's happening in the market, and let compound interest do its magic. And compound interest truly is magical. Einstein allegedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, and once you understand how it works, you'll see why. Let's say you invest $500 a month in index funds starting at age 25. Assuming a 7% annual return, you'll have over $1 million by age 65. But here's what's really amazing. You'll have only contributed $240,000 of your own money. The other $800,000 will have come from compound interest. That's the power of starting early and being consistent. Even if you can't invest $500 a month, the principle is the same. $100 a month invested consistently will grow to hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. The key is to start now, even if you can't invest much, and let time work in your favor. But what if you're not 25? What if you're 40 or 50 or even 60? Is it too late to start building wealth? Absolutely not. While it's true that time is your most powerful ally in building wealth, it's never too late to start. The second best time to plant a tree is today, and the same principle applies to investing. If you're starting later in life, you might need to be more aggressive with your savings rate, but the fundamentals are the same. Automate your investments, focus on low-cost index funds, and let compound interest work for you. And remember, retirement isn't the only reason to build wealth. Maybe you want to travel the world. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you want to have the freedom to take care of aging parents. Whatever your goals, the sooner you start building wealth, the more options you'll have. This brings us to one of the most important concepts in Ramit's book, the idea that money is about freedom, not stuff. Most people think that the point of having money is to buy things, bigger houses, nicer cars, expensive clothes. But wealthy people understand that the real value of money is the freedom it provides. The freedom to choose how you spend your time, the freedom to take risks, the freedom to help others, the freedom to live your life on your own terms. When you understand that money is about freedom, it changes everything. You stop trying to impress others with your purchases and start focusing on what truly matters to you. You stop comparing yourself to others and start building the life you actually want. You stop feeling guilty about spending money and start feeling confident about your financial decisions. This is what Ramit means when he talks about building a rich life. It's not about having a certain amount of money in the bank. It's about having the freedom to live according to your values and priorities. For some people, a rich life means traveling the world. For others, it means spending time with family. For still others, it means pursuing creative projects or building a business. The point is that your rich life is unique to you, and your financial strategy should be designed to support that vision. This is why Ramit's approach is so different from traditional financial advice. Instead of starting with generic rules and trying to apply them to everyone, he starts with your individual goals and values and builds a financial plan around them. He understands that personal finance is personal, and what works for one person might not work for another.
So how do you put all of this together? How do you actually implement Ramit's system and start building your rich life? It starts with getting clear on what you want, not what you think you should want. Not what others expect you to want, but what you actually want. What does your ideal life look like? What are your money dials? What would make you feel truly wealthy? Once you have clarity on your goals, you can start building systems to support them. Set up automatic transfers for savings and investments. Create a conscious spending plan that aligns with your values. Focus on increasing your income through strategic career moves and side projects. And remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about progress. You don't need to have everything figured out before you start. You just need to start somewhere and keep moving forward. The beauty of systems is that they improve over time. As you learn more about what works for you, you can adjust and optimize. As your income grows, you can increase your savings and investments. As your priorities change, you can adjust your spending plan. The key is to start now, even if you can't do everything perfectly. Look, I know this all sounds almost too good to be true. The idea that you can build wealth while spending money on things you love, that you can automate your finances and stop worrying about money, that you can create a rich life without sacrificing everything you enjoy. It goes against everything we've been taught about money. But here's the thing, the traditional approach isn't working. Despite all the budgeting apps and financial advice out there, most Americans are still struggling with money. They're still stressed about their finances, still living paycheck to paycheck, still feeling guilty about their spending. Maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to stop treating money like the enemy and start treating it like the tool it is. Maybe it's time to stop optimizing for poverty and start optimizing for abundance. Maybe it's time to stop feeling guilty about wanting nice things and start building a plan to afford them. The choice is yours, but I'll tell you this, life is too short to spend it worrying about money. Life is too short to feel guilty about buying things you enjoy. Life is too short to postpone happiness until some future date when you've saved enough money. Ramit's system gives you permission to live well while building wealth, to enjoy the journey while working toward your destination, to be rich in all the ways that matter. And honestly, isn't that what we all want? To build a life we love without guilt, without stress, without constantly second-guessing our financial decisions. The truth is, you already have everything you need to start building wealth. You don't need more knowledge. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need a high income. You just need to start implementing systems that work with your psychology instead of against it. You need to give yourself permission to spend on what matters to you while automating the important stuff. You need to focus on growing your income instead of just cutting expenses. And you need to remember that building wealth is a marathon, not a sprint. It's about consistent progress over time, not perfect execution from day one. So here's what I want you to do. Pick one thing from everything we've talked about today and implement it this week. Maybe it's setting up automatic transfers for savings and investments. Maybe it's having a conversation with your partner about your money dials. Maybe it's researching ways to increase your income. Whatever it is, just start. Because the perfect plan you never implement is worthless. But the imperfect plan you actually follow can change your life. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment below and tell me what your rich life looks like. Hit that subscribe button if you want more content like this. Because when we share knowledge, when we support each other, when we give ourselves permission to build the lives we want, everybody wins. You've got this, and I believe in you. Now go out there and start building your rich life.